Have you ever seen something that you just couldn't explain? Something that made the hairs on the back of your neck stand up and a cold shiver run down your spine? Today, we're diving into a story like that, a local legend that has baffled a small town for generations. This is the story of the window on the hill. Imagine a small, quiet town, the kind you see in postcards. But on the edge of this town, perched atop a hill overlooking everything, is a house, an old, derelict Victorian mansion. Its windows like vacant eyes staring out at the world below. For as long as anyone can remember, this house has been abandoned, left to decay with the passing seasons. The paint is peeling, the porch is collapsing, and the gardens are overgrown with weeds and thorns. Locals whisper stories about it, tales told to scare children on Halloween nights. But one part of the legend is more than just a story. It's a verifiable phenomenon that dozens of people have witnessed over the years. It all centers on one specific window, the highest window on the west-facing side of the house, a small, circular portal right under the peak of the roof. Every single night, without fail, at the stroke of midnight, a figure appears in that window. It's the silhouette of a woman, dressed in what looks like a long, flowing white dress. She doesn't move. She doesn't wave or gesture. She just stands there, a silent sentinel, watching the town below. For decades, this was the town's chilling ritual. Teenagers would dare each other to drive up the winding road to the base of the hill, to park their cars and wait. They'd turn off their headlights, their hearts pounding in the darkness, and stare up at the house. And every time, just as the clock on the dashboard ticked over to 12 a.m., she would be there, a pale, ghostly shape against the blackness of the empty room behind her. Some said she was a jilted bride, waiting for a lover who never returned. Others claimed she was the original owner of the house, unable to leave the home she loved so dearly. The stories varied, but the core fact remained. The woman in the window was real. Skeptics tried to debunk it. They suggested it was a trick of the light, a reflection from the moon on the old glass, or perhaps a cleverly placed mannequin. But no explanation ever stuck. The figure was too detailed to consistently present, to be a simple optical illusion. It looked like a person. Years turned into decades, and the house on the hill, along with its spectral resident, became a permanent part of the town's identity. It was a local, spooky landmark, a place of legend. Then, a few years ago, the town council decided things had to change. The house was an eyesore, a safety hazard, and its creepy reputation was starting to affect property values in the area. A wealthy developer, seeing an opportunity, bought the property with a grand vision to restore it to its former glory. He wanted to turn it into a luxury bed and breakfast. The town was abuzz with a mix of excitement and apprehension. Would the restoration finally solve the mystery? Would the construction workers find something inside the house that could explain the nightly apparitions? The renovation project began, and it was a massive undertaking. The house was in even worse shape than it appeared from the outside. Floors had rotted through, walls were crumbling, and the entire structure needed to be reinforced. As the workers methodically stripped the house down to its bones, the town held its breath. Everyone was waiting for a discovery, but there was nothing. No hidden journals, no secret passages, no skeletal remains. The house was just old and empty. As the project neared its final stages, the focus turned to the infamous attic window. The foreman sent a team up to the top floor to inspect it, and that's when they made the most baffling discovery of all. The attic space where the window was located was completely inaccessible. There were no stairs leading up to it. There wasn't even a hole in the ceiling for a ladder. The entire attic floor was sealed off, a solid expanse of wood and plaster that hadn't been touched in, by the looks of it, over a century. The circular window was there, just as it appeared from the outside, but it was embedded in a solid wall. There was no room, no platform, no ledge behind it where a person could possibly stand. It was physically impossible for anyone to be in that window. The news spread through the town like wildfire. The mystery had deepened beyond anyone's imagination. If no one could get to the window from the inside, then who or what had they been seeing all these years? The developer, a pragmatist, dismissed it as old house quirks. His team finished the restoration, and the house was transformed. It was beautiful, a gleaming white jewel on the hill, with manicured lawns and a welcoming porch. The infamous window was now clean and sparkling, part of a luxurious master suite. To create the suite, the builders had, of course, constructed a new floor and a proper room around that window, complete with a beautiful staircase for access. The grand reopening was a huge event. The bed and breakfast, named the Hillside Manor, was booked solid for months. The first official guest was a travel writer, a man known for his cynical and straightforward reviews. He was given the master suite, the very room with the now famous window. He thought the local legend was a charming bit of folklore, perfect for adding color to his article. That night, the town was watching. Not just a few teenagers in a car, but dozens of people gathered at the base of the hill. Their phones and cameras pointed at the house. They wanted to see what would happen now. Would the woman appear, even with the house full of life? Or had the renovation finally laid the ghost to rest? As midnight approached, a tense silence fell over the crowd. The lights in the house went out one by one as the guests retired for the night. The final light to go out was in the master suite. Las 11:59. The crowd held its collective breath. The clock struck 12. Nothing. The window remained dark. A wave of disappointment and relief washed over the onlookers. It was over. The legend was just a story after all. The ghost was gone. People started to pack up, chatting amongst themselves. The magic of the mystery now broken. But the story doesn't end there. The next morning, the travel writer came down for breakfast, looking pale and shaken. He checked out immediately, refusing to speak to anyone, and left town without writing his review. It was the manor's staff who pieced together what happened. When they went to clean his room, they found it in disarray. The bed was unmade, a suitcase was half-packed on the floor, and a glass of water was knocked over on the nightstand. And on the pristine, newly installed hardwood floor, right in the middle of the bedroom, were faint, wet footprints. They led from the circular window to the foot of the bed. It was as if someone had walked in from the outside, through the glass, and stopped right where the guest would have been sleeping. The most chilling detail came from the head housekeeper. She said she felt an inexplicable cold spot in the room, a lingering chill that wouldn't go away. And when she looked in the mirror above the dresser, she saw something that made her scream and run from the room. Reflected in the glass, for just a fleeting second, was the image of a woman in a white dress, standing in the middle of the room. She wasn't just watching anymore. She was smiling. It was a wide, welcoming smile, as if after all those years of waiting outside, she had finally been invited in. The Hillside Manor closed within a month. No one has stayed there since. But the locals say that if you look up at the house on the hill at midnight, the window is no longer empty. The light in the master suite is always on. And sometimes, just sometimes, you can see a figure moving inside, gracefully dancing around the room, finally at home. What do you think happened? Was she a spirit tethered to the house, waiting for it to be lived in again, or something else entirely? Let me know your theories in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoy a good mystery, make sure to like and subscribe for more stories like this. Sleep tight. Have you ever picked up a passenger who just felt off? For one taxi driver, it wasn't just a feeling. It was a recurring nightmare that started on a foggy autumn night. Let's call him Mark. Mark had been driving his cab for over 20 years, seeing everything the city had to offer, or so he thought. The first time he saw her, it was just past midnight. The fog was so thick it was like driving through a cloud. His headlights barely cut through the gloom. And then, there she was, standing by the side of an old, deserted road that snaked through the woods. A woman in a long, white dress. Now, Mark wasn't one to scare his pull over. He figured she must be in some kind of trouble, dressed like that in the middle of nowhere. He rolled down the window. "Need a ride, miss?" She didn't say a word. She just nodded, her face partially hidden by the fog and the shadows. She opened the back door and slid in. The silence in the car was immediate and heavy. Mark asked, "Where to?" Nothing. He glanced in his rearview mirror, but her face was obscured, just a pale shape in the darkness of the back seat. He waited a moment, then decided to just start driving towards the city. Maybe she was in shock. He tried making small talk, asking about her night, commenting on the weather. Each question was met with absolute silence. It was unnerving. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the quiet swish of the tires on the wet pavement. He drove for about 15 minutes, the fog refusing to let up. He glanced in the mirror again. The back seat was empty. He slammed on the brakes, his heart pounding in his chest. He turned around, searched the entire back of the cab. Nothing. She was gone. He thought maybe his mind was playing tricks on him. The long hours, the lonely roads, it had to be a hallucination. He tried to laugh it off, but the feeling of cold dread stayed with him all the way home. A week later, another foggy night. Mark was on the same stretch of road, heading back to the depot. And there she was again, the same woman, the same white dress, standing in the exact same spot. A shivery went down his spine. Part of him wanted to speed past, to pretend he hadn't seen her, but his professional instincts, or maybe some morbid curiosity, took over. Pulled over, just like before. She got him without a word. The air in the cab instantly grew cold. This time, Mark was determined to get an answer. "Look, miss, I have to know where you're going. I can't just drive aimlessly." Silence. He looked in the rearview mirror. Her head was bowed, her long dark hair hiding her face. He could just see the white fabric of her dress. He felt a profound sadness coming from her, a wave of despair that was almost suffocating. He decided to just drive again, feeling like he was caught in some strange, waking dream. He kept his eyes glued to the road, but every few seconds, he would flick his gaze up to the mirror. She was always there, a still, silent statue in his back seat. The silence was louder than any scream. He felt like he was driving a ghost. And then, just as before, he looked up, and she was gone. The car felt warmer instantly. The oppressive silence lifted. But this time, he knew it wasn't his imagination. This bizarre encounter happened 3 more times over the next month, always on a foggy night, always on that same road. Mark started to dread the fog. He tried to take different routes, but somehow he'd always end up back on that haunted stretch of highway. Each time was identical. The silent woman in white would appear, get in his cab, and then vanish into thin air. He never saw her face clearly, never heard her voice. He told a few of his fellow drivers, but they just laughed at him. Told him he needed a vacation. He started to think he was going crazy. The stress was getting to him. He was barely sleeping, and every shadow seemed to be her, waiting. One night, the fog was the thickest he had ever seen. It was a suffocating blanket of white. He knew he shouldn't go near that road, but it felt like his cab had a mind of its own, steering him towards her. And sure enough, there she was. His heart hammered against his ribs. He stopped the car, his hands trembling on the steering wheel. He watched in the side mirror as she approached, a pale figure drifting through the mist. She opened the door, and the familiar chill filled the car. But this time something was different. As she settled into the seat, he felt an overwhelming sense of dread, far worse than ever before. He started driving, his knuckles white on the wheel. He didn't even bother asking where she was going. He just wanted it to be over. The silence in the car was absolute, a crushing weight. He couldn't stand it. He had to look. Slowly, he lifted his eyes to the rearview mirror, and his blood ran cold. She was looking right at him. Her head was up, and he could see her face for the first time. It was pale, impossibly pale, with eyes that were just dark, empty pools of sorrow. But they weren't just sad. They were staring straight into him, through him. There was no expression on her face, just that vacant, soul-piercing gaze. He felt paralyzed, pinned by her stare. The world outside the car seemed to disappear. It was just him and her, trapped in this bubble of silence and terror. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't look away. Her eyes held him captive. He doesn't remember how long he was frozen like that. The next thing he knew, he was jerking the wheel, the car swerving wildly. He blinked, and she was gone. The back seat was empty. The oppressive atmosphere vanished, leaving him gasping for air, his body drenched in a cold sweat. He pulled the car over, his whole body shaking uncontrollably. He sat there for what felt like hours, trying to process what he had just seen. That face, those eyes, they were burned into his memory. He knew then that he could never drive that road again. He finally managed to get the car started and drove straight home, not even finishing his shift. The next morning, Mark woke up feeling exhausted, as if he hadn't slept at all. The image of the woman's face was still fresh in his mind. He decided he needed to sell the cab, to quit this job, to get as far away from that road as possible. He went out to his car to clean it out one last time. He was still shaken, half expecting to see her sitting in the back seat. He opened the driver's side door, and the morning sun streamed in. Something on the dashboard caught his eye. It was something white. Lying there, perfectly placed in the center of the dashboard, was a single white glove. It was an old-fashioned, delicate lady's glove, folded neatly in half. Mark stared at it, his mind reeling. He was meticulous about his cab. He cleaned it every single night. No passenger had left anything behind yesterday. He was sure of it. And she had never moved. He had watched her in the mirror. She had never reached forward, never touched anything. She had just sat there, and then she was gone. Yet here was this glove, a physical object left behind by a phantom. He reached out a trembling hand and touched the fabric. It was real. It felt old and soft. It was undeniable proof that she wasn't just in his head. The silent passenger was real, and she had left him a message. But what did it mean? He never found out. He sold the cab that week and moved to a different city, forever haunted by the memory of the woman in white and the single, solitary glove she left behind. Thanks for watching. If you have a chilling story of your own, share it in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more mysteries that lurk in the dark. Stay safe out there. The first thing I noticed about the new apartment wasn't the way the afternoon sun slanted through the dusty windows, or the charming, slightly uneven hardwood floors. It was the closet in the bedroom. It was deep, almost a small room in itself, smelling faintly of cedar and something else, something sweet and floral, like old perfume. And hanging right in the center, as if waiting just for me, was a dress. It was beautiful, a simple, elegant white dress, made of a fabric that felt like silk but shimmered like moonlight. It had a classic cut, something timeless that could have been from any decade in the last century. My first thought was that the previous tenant must have forgotten it. I made a mental note to call the landlord, but curiosity got the better of me. I took it off the hanger. The fabric was cool and impossibly soft against my skin. On a whim, I decided to try it on. I stood in front of the full-length mirror attached to the closet door, and my breath caught in my throat. It fit. Not just fit. It was perfect. It hugged my waist, flared out at the hips, and the hem fell to just the right spot in my calves. It was as if it had been tailored specifically for me. I'd never felt so beautiful in anything before. The thought of calling the landlord faded away. It felt like it was mine. It felt like it had always been mine. A few days later, I had a housewarming party. I decided to wear the dress. It was the perfect occasion. As my friends arrived, they all complimented me. "Wow, you look amazing." One sighed. "Where did you get that dress?" Another asked. But then my friend Sarah, who I've known since kindergarten, tilted her head. "You look so familiar in that?" she said, frowning slightly. "Have I seen you in it before?" I laughed and told her no, I'd just found it. She shrugged, but the comment stuck with me. Familiar? How could I look familiar in a dress I'd never worn? The next week, I wore it to a coffee shop downtown. The barista, a young guy I'd never seen before, handed me my latte and said, "You know, you really remind me of someone." I smiled politely, not thinking much of it. But it kept happening. An old woman on the bus, the cashier at the grocery store, a stranger I passed on the street. They all had the same reaction, a flicker of recognition in their eyes, a slight pause, and then some variation of, "You look so familiar," or "Have we met before?" It was flattering at first, then a little strange, and then, honestly, it started to unnerve me. Each time, I was wearing the white dress. One evening, I was home alone, feeling a little restless. I put on the dress. It had become a strange comfort, despite the weird comments. I felt drawn to it. As I walked through the living room, I noticed something I hadn't before. On the wall opposite the big window, there were faint outlines, small rectangular shapes where pictures must have once hung. The previous tenant must have taken them down, but the sun had faded the wallpaper around them. Curiosity piqued again. I started searching the apartment. Maybe they'd left more than just the dress. In a dusty corner of a high kitchen cabinet, tucked behind some old contact paper, I found a small, leather-bound photo album. My heart started to beat a little faster. I sat down at the kitchen table and opened it. The first photograph was old, black and white, and slightly faded. It showed a young woman standing in my living room. I recognized the window, the distinct pattern of the hardwood floor. She was smiling, a wide, happy smile, and she was wearing the dress. My dress. I flipped the page. Another photo, this one from the 70s, judging by the colors and the woman's hairstyle. She was standing in the exact same spot, posed the same way, smiling the same smile, and she was wearing the same white dress. Page after page, it was the same thing. A woman from the 80s with big hair. A woman from the 90s with a grunge-era choker. A more recent photo of a woman who looked to be from the early 2000s. Different women, from different times. All of them tenants of this very apartment. And in every single photograph, they stood in the same spot. They wore the same dress, and they had the exact same serene, slightly vacant smile on their faces. A cold dread washed over me. I looked at the photos, their faces blurring together until they all looked vaguely alike. They all looked familiar. The same way people said I looked. I felt an irresistible urge. I stood up, walked into the living room, and positioned myself in that exact spot by the wall. I turned my head slightly, just like they had. I felt the corners of my mouth pull upwards into a smile that didn't feel entirely my own. I caught my reflection in the dark glass of the window, my face, my hair. But the smile was wrong. It was their smile. I looked just like them. Another picture for the album. My hand went to the neckline of the dress, the fabric cool and possessive against my skin. I tried to pull it too tight, off, but my fingers wouldn't obey. My body felt stiff, like a doll being positioned for a photograph. I stood there, smiling at my own reflection. As the last rays of sun disappeared and the room grew dark, I realized the dress wasn't just forgotten. It was waiting, and the sweet, floral scent in the closet. It wasn't old perfume. It was the smell of decay, hidden beneath a beautiful facade. The dress didn't just fit me perfectly. It was changing me to fit it. I was becoming the next girl in the photograph. Another familiar face, trapped forever in a white dress, smiling in the dark. And the worst part? A small part of me didn't want to leave. A small part of me felt beautiful. Finally and forever beautiful. I wonder who will find the dress next. I wonder if she'll think she looks familiar, too. I'll be here, waiting on the wall, smiling with all the others. We'll be waiting for her. The old-timers in town have a saying. Don't go near the lake after dark. They say it with a look in their eyes that's more than just a friendly warning. It's a deep-seated fear, something passed down through generations. They tell stories, hushed and hurried, about the lake's edge, about the mist that clings to the water's surface, even on the clearest nights. They talk about a woman dressed in a flowing white gown, almost indistinguishable from the fog itself. They say she waits there, her figure a pale silhouette against the inky blackness of the water. And she calls out, not a scream, not a shout, but a soft, mournful plea for help. A sound that hooks into your heart and pulls you closer. Most people, locals and seasoned travelers alike, heed the warning. They lock their doors, draw their curtains, and pretend not to hear the faint whispers carried on the night wind. They know that some mysteries are best left unsolved, some voices best ignored. But there's always one, isn't there? Someone new to town. Someone who thinks the stories are just local folklore. A bit of spooky fun to entertain the tourists. Someone who is just a little too curious, a little too brave for their own good. Our story is about one such let's call him Ethan. He was a photographer, drawn to the rugged, untouched beauty of the area. He'd spent his days hiking the trails, capturing the majestic mountains and the vibrant sunsets. He heard the stories in the local pub, of course. He chuckled along with the bartender, dismissing them as charming ghost tales. A woman in white. By the lake, he'd said with a grin. Sounds like a great photo opportunity. The bartender's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Just be careful, son. That lake has a long memory. One evening, after a particularly stunning sunset, Ethan was packing up his gear. The sky was a canvas of deep purples and fading oranges. A low-lying mist was beginning to form over the lake, just as the stories described. He was about to head back to his rented cabin when he heard it. A voice, faint and ethereal, drifting across the water. "Help me. Please." It was soft, almost musical, yet laced with an undeniable desperation. It didn't sound threatening. It sounded like someone was genuinely in trouble. Ethan's first instinct, the one that makes us human, was to help. He scanned the shoreline, his heart pounding a little faster. Was someone hurt? Had a hiker fallen? He shouted back, "Hello, is someone there? Where are you?" The only reply was that same gentle plea, seeming to come from just a little further along the water's edge. He grabbed his heavy-duty flashlight and started walking, his boots crunching on the gravel path that wound along the lake. The air grew colder, the mist thicker, swirling around his legs like phantom hands. He followed the voice, which always seemed to be just ahead of him, just out of sight. "Please, I'm so cold," it whispered. The sound drew him on, a moth to a flickering, ghostly flame. He pushed through tangled branches and over slick Moscow-Verde rocks, his flashlight beam cutting a nervous path through the fog. The world seemed to shrink, reduced to just the sound of his own breathing, the crunch of his footsteps, and that sad, alluring voice. He was getting closer to the water's edge, the lapping of small waves now clearly audible. The voice was right there now, seeming to emanate from the very surface of the water in front of him. "Help me." He stood at the very brink of the lake. The mist was so thick he couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. The black water looked like polished obsidian, perfectly still. He saw nothing. No woman, no struggling swimmer, nothing. Just the impenetrable fog and the silent, waiting lake. A shiver that had nothing to do with the cold ran down his spine. The bartender's warning echoed in his mind. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. He backed away slowly, his heart hammering against his ribs. The voice had stopped. The silence that replaced it was somehow more terrifying. He turned and scrambled back the way he came, not daring to look behind him. He didn't stop running until the warm lights of his cabin were in sight. He slammed the door, bolted it, and spent the rest of the night with every light on, jumping at every creak and groan of the old wooden structure. He told himself it was just his imagination, the mist playing tricks on his ears, but he couldn't shake the feeling of profound dread. The next morning, the sun was bright, the sky was clear, and the lake looked serene and beautiful, as if nothing had ever happened. The mist was gone. It was easy to believe it had all been a bad dream, but the local sheriff, making his morning rounds, noticed something odd. A set of footprints on the damp shore. Wary, deep purposeful prints from a man's hiking boot. The sheriff followed them. They led from the main path directly to the water's edge, and there they stopped. Just stopped. But that wasn't the strangest part. Right beside the final pair of hiking boot prints, there was another set. They were much smaller, delicate, the imprints of bare feet. They were pale impressions in the mud, as if made by someone with no weight at all. And unlike the traveler's prints, which led asterisk to lake, these prints were facing it. They didn't lead from anywhere. They were just there. See as if two people had stood together, looking out over the dark water. The small, pale footprints looked impossibly old, worn down by time, as if they had been standing in that exact spot, waiting for a very, very long time. The traveler, Ethan, was never seen again. His camera was found in his cabin, filled with beautiful photos of mountains and sunsets. His car was still parked outside, but of Ethan himself, there was no trace. The townspeople nodded grimly when they heard the news. They knew. The woman in white was no longer waiting alone. She had found someone to stand with her by the edge of the cold, dark water. The lake keeps its secrets, and sometimes it keeps its visitors, too. So if you ever find yourself near a lonely lake at night and you hear a soft voice calling for help, just keep walking. Don't look back, because some calls are not meant to be answered. Thanks for listening to our story tonight. If you enjoy Tales of the Strange and Unexplained, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We have many more secrets to share. Until next time, stay safe and maybe stay away from the water after dark.